Hey everybody, it's Book of Katherine, and I am back. And there are two things that I wanted to talk about. And the first is I had just shared a video about Dr. Jordan Peterson saying that there is such a thing as having too much compassion. That being a nice person and being nice, we need to have a balance of like 50% compassion and 50% strength and tiger teeth. And then what makes a good person is knowing when to use which side, like knowing when to, and I'm paraphrasing this, of course, and I'll try and link the video below. He said, when you show too much compassion, what happens is it can be deadly in a nursing home. He said, if you're working in a nursing home and you show too much compassion and do everything for them, then you actually speed their demise. And I was thinking about that in terms of my own life, and this will be uncomfortable, I think, for people, but you can skip ahead a few bit. I'm going to talk about my health. So I had a level 10 episode recently, a couple days ago, and my husband put on the fire because the fire really helps, like a wood stove fire. That kind of fire helps a lot. But the fire isn't in the same room like I'm in now, like where I'm on the floor. And the fire doesn't really reach that room very well. It's very difficult to feel the fire there, and we're working on ways to change that. But basically, when I was in that level 10 pain, I had a choice. I could rely on my husband to pull me up and drag me in front of that fire. The pain was, so basically it was something, I don't know, whatever is going on in that mid-back. I mean, figuring a lot of stuff out, like exactly where it attaches. But when those two things go, I felt it much, the good news is I felt it much more clearly. Like I could, not only can I draw where it's going, but on both sides, I could actually feel where it was coming out of my spine in the SI joint. Before that, two SI joints, just all up and down it used to hurt. This time, no. Like I felt exactly where like a certain nerve went through each side. I could feel it precisely. And that's a good thing. That means it's narrowing down and we're getting things figured out. But when that was going, like I had no legs. Like once that mid back, like whatever attaches and goes through that SI and straight up into the middle of my, like right behind my belly button. Like, once that goes, like, that, it's like turning off my legs. I feel like a puppet who's had their leg strings cut off. Just gone. Just gone. And I was like, okay, so how do I get to the fire? I have a choice to make at that point. You know, I'm in blinding pain, trying not to pass out. When you hit a 10, it's a real fight not to pass out. I was screaming, and I was crying, I was sobbing, and, you know, my husband, that's hell for him. That's hell. But he also is, thank goodness, and I don't know if we never even talked about this, but maybe it's just because we're both like this and he knows what, I don't know, I don't know why, but he waits until he says, do you want help? And I say no. And I usually say no. That's a choice that I make, and he asks if I want help, and I think that's really, really important. And I didn't. I went on my elbows, and I dragged myself and my legs to the fire. Like, I just dragged myself, and I was like, oh, yeah, look how far I've come, right? But I've come really far, because that used to be my daily grind. That was my daily grind. And now, you know, like 10s, I was hitting 10s so often a week, it's not even funny. And it's not like that anymore. And I don't have my legs completely gone all the time. But the point is even during that time, I never got a wheelchair. And the worst thing I got was a walker. Now, I wish I'd gotten that walker sooner. I really wish I'd gotten that walker sooner. I didn't think about it. I couldn't use the cane anymore. I was always leaning on him. When you have to really lean on a person in order to walk or move anywhere, it's time to get a walker. And I just never even thought of it. You know, a doctor never recommended or anything like that. And they usually won't. And the reason why is, from what my friends who are doctors have told me, the reason that doctors don't recommend walking assistance things is because you never ever go back. Once you start using assistance things, you don't go back. And I'm like, well, I'm not that kind of person, you know, like I'm not going to use it if I don't have to, right? And so, I mean, even now I have to use my walker sometimes, but I hate using that thing. I'm not going to use it unless I need to. And I am lucky to have enough to have a husband who waits. Remember that time I told you in the parking lot? He says, you can't walk. And I was like, I can do it. I can do it. I took my cane and he let me go anyway. He did not, and he let me learn on my own. I need those lessons, you know, and then I collapsed on a pole. Now he was right behind me. You know what I mean? But he is so compassionate and so amazing. And I feel like the fact that he lets me fail, the fact that and I don't, but see, I didn't even think of that as failing. I took that as I still maximized what I could do. I still walked and I made it pretty darn far. And then I took the walker. Does that make sense? Like, and that builds your legs. It builds your legs. You got it. It's like a bit, you know, and I remember when I started watching enough of my videos, I was like, oh man, I need to just wake up and smell the coffee. Like I started understanding that I really needed a wheelchair. Like I was like, that's that I need a wheelchair. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget when they were like, you'll never walk again if you do that. And I was shocked because I was just in this physical therapy mode of like getting out. Like, and remember I said I was crawling out of the physical therapy place and everything like that. And I know that's hard to hear for everybody, but it's 6 months later and it's paid off. Like I've gotten there. It's just, I was that badly degenerated, like that my muscles were that badly degenerated. And whatever it is there's a reason that I walk like this, like out of there. Like I could come in kind of like this and then I'd walk out like this out of there. And now I know that's right behind my belly button, those two things that are right there. And you figure that out, but I wouldn't have figured that out if I hadn't kept going with my physical therapy. And so it just, you know, you figure things out. And I don't know, my point is that there is such a thing as compassion. I feel like my husband's more compassionate than people who try to do everything for people who are, you know, disabled or have lost motion or ability. And what's really difficult, here's the thing that's hard to do, is that it's hard to sit there and watch, let's say, your grandmother. It's really hard to see your grandmother get up from the seat that they're sitting in and struggle to get up into their wheelchair or into their walker or wherever they need to go. It takes time. It takes forever. It's painful to watch the struggle. And usually people don't want to suffer that pain of watching a person. And what I want to share, and so they cut it off and say here, and they cut right in and help. And here's what I want to share with you is that for the person in the middle of that, to you, it seems like it's taking forever. To you, it seems like this is really painful to watch. To you, it seems like all of these things that seem tragic. To the person doing it, their mind is completely consumed with moving. They're trying to figure out where to go. Really stop watching the pain and what makes you uncomfortable. Start watching the motions that they're making. And you'll start noticing that they are figuring out, they're like balancing here, then balancing there, then catching this. And it is very, very much like doing rock climbing. Like making your next move. Okay, which rock do I take next? Which one do I climb? What's the best option? What's this? What's that? Where do I go next? Their minds are consumed with that. How do I make it across this ropes course? You think it's this horrible experience to watch and so difficult just because that's not how you move. But for the person who's in that place, it's not moving like super slow to them at all. Like their minds are actually churning pretty freaking quickly, and their minds are fully consumed and they're working. They're working and they're sweating it out. And you have to let them do that. You have to let them learn their bodies and let them figure it out. And you don't come in until it looks like they are going to hurt themselves, which means if they start going down for a fall, you catch them. Anything in between, you let them struggle, just like you let a baby struggle to learn how to take their first steps and everything like that. You cannot smother. And that is why at the end of this episode, when Dr. Phil's like, and I gotta get your parents to back off, and you hear this girl whispered, please, like in desperation, please. And you wouldn't know that. If you'd watched the beginning of the episode, you would think that the girl's loving the attention. She's absolutely adoring it. And it turns out, no, she's just like, please get them off. And it's because, you know, the parents aren't going through what she's going through, and they think it's all pain and all torture. And, you know, when you're in, she would go into seizures and episodes or attacks or whatever they called them. And I'll tell you, when I have my attacks, not saying that this is, and again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor at all. Please don't take this as medical advice. Like, talk to your doctors about what I'm saying. Talk to your therapist about what I'm saying. Like, get feedback. Talk to your people about what I'm saying and see if this works for you, or see if this is something you want to do. Like, I'm not a professional. But I know during my attacks, like, it wasn't until I had an in-home nurse tell me to record, like, do a stopwatch on my attacks, that we found, they would ask me, how long are your attacks? And I'd be like, I have no idea, 5-10 minutes? And they were like, you don't know, okay, you really, because they were worried that we weren't calling the ambulance every single time. And I was like, we can't afford that. That's why this family had to mortgage their homes and everything, because they're calling the ambulance every single time. We can't afford anything like that. We could, and we're just like, you know, no one's been able to tell us anything about it. Like, no one's been able to do a freaking thing. And we're like, what are we going to do? Call an ambulance every time? And not to mention that the medical care is not great locally here. It's like, we knew we'd actually, to be honest, for us, we'd be putting I knew I'd be putting my life in danger if I called the ambulance. And so, I was just like, heck no, like, the safest place is to stay here for us. And that was our decision, not saying anyone else should do that. I seriously doubt you have anything going on like with our place. Ours is really, really rare. I've never heard of anything like it. So anyway, so we just were like, forget that. So we had no idea. So we started watching it, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. It was 1 hour and 45 minutes. The attack was 1 hour and 45 minutes long. And we were shocked. Maybe my husband wasn't. I know I was. I never thought they went that long. I never would have told you I went that long. Because when you're in the middle of it, when you're screaming and when you're screaming pain or whatever it is that you're going through, well, I don't know. For me, when I was going through it, I can't speak for anybody else. But when I was going through my attack, you know, maybe ask and see if it's like this. The time warp is different. You know, pain erases all sense of time. It interrupts linear thought. Which brings me to point 2. Which is totally a different episode. But point 2 is, he brought up at the end this type of work of remapping the brain and retraining the neurons in the brain. And that's the kind of work that I did with my therapy for my trauma in my childhood. Remember how I said I was on antidepressants and all these sorts of things, and then I did a certain kind of therapy that remapped the brain using TheraTappers and things like that. So I said I did that therapy and with a therapist. And it got me off of all the medicines, and it got me off of, like, it just got me off the treadmill of drama, really, that I talk about in the Dr. Phil episode. And it just, like, I just really, really changed. It just, like, hold on. I learned how to do emotion regulation. And so when you experience trauma, usually you can go through the set of emotions. And you can find that certain emotions, you have trauma there, so when they happen to you, you don't regulate them correctly. It sets you off. It sets you off the deep end in some way, whether it be an anxiety attack, whether it be, you know, all these different ways. And so for me, there were certain triggers for me, and I had to learn what those were and learn how to regulate my emotions when they happened. And my life really took off after that. But now that I'm sick, and here's what I wanted to mention to you, he mentions this thing. One of the big therapies that's been really helpful to me is I've been working with a lady with cranial sacral. Now that I'm working with the biofeedback lady, she's like, are you getting any kind of work? Like, have you ever heard of this body work, like somatic body work? And I was like, well, I'm working with a lady who studied under Peter Levine. And she's like, that's it. You're doing that? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, good. And she's like, is it working for you? And I said, yeah, it actually feels like this thing I did with emotion regulation with my therapist, but I feel like I'm just doing it with the body. And I cannot recommend that enough. If you have been in pain for long term, if you have suffered from chronic pain, you're going to need this kind of therapy. And there's a bunch of type of body works. It's like a somatic dysfunction or body psychology. There's all these different things. And I can tell you that it's been a big part of my healing process. And a lot of craniosacral people do it as well. Or you can call it energy work, but it's not the type of energy work that's like New Age at all. It's very much tied to psychology and psychological training. And what it does is it remaps the brain in a way, and it really changes like what's going on in your body. It changes your body physically, but you're doing that just like, for example, just like the work I did with the TheraTappers, that completely changed my body physically. It remapped the neurons in my brain and totally rerouted things, like rerouted all these maps. I could feel it every day. We'd have to put on sunglasses and we'd have to actually book a hotel because it was so far away from our home. We had to book a hotel and I had to go sit in the dark for a while to let my brain calm down. That's how much we were remapping my brain. And so this body work is so easy for me because I've already been there. I already know how to do the imaging. I already know how to process it. I already know how to do all this stuff, but you're doing it on your body. And what they do is there are just areas I can tell. For example, let me give you an example. Like I had severe pelvic pain. Pelvic pain, the house. I mean, obviously the SI joint is in the pelvic area and so is the ganglion impar, both pelvic area. So, but I also had a lot of reproductive things, which I've talked about earlier on my channel. Horrible, horrible reproductive pain going on, which acupuncture just did miracles with, thank goodness. Like no doctor could, even the best doctors ever, they couldn't figure it out. But this acupuncture worked, which is why I say if you can't figure it out with Western medicine in a year, start trying to try other things in conjunction with it. That's just, I'm not a doctor. It's what's worked for me. And I wish everyone I remember in the beginning told us to use all this stuff, and we didn't. But even insurance companies cover it. I'm like, that should have been a hint to me. But anyway, when I did this, oh, I lost my train of thought. All right, now I remember. Okay, so during this whole, like, whatever, almost 10-year ordeal now, the pelvic pain was insane, right? And reproductive was a problem. I didn't know, there was a lot of things. Now we know that the spine was a problem, the SI was a problem, both sides, and the reproductive organs had a problem. Like, case in point, not only do your reproductive organs hurt tremendously when your ganglion impar is not working correctly, it makes even using the restroom painful. But I was, it turned out I had a uterus infection for 2.5 years, and they didn't catch it. 2.5 years, and they didn't catch it. And I remember we kept going to doctor after doctor saying there is this intense pain right here. All my lidocaine patches were just patched all the way to the house, all over like my ovaries and all over my uterus and all over. And we were just like, what is going on in this pelvic area? What the heck? And then eventually they caught that there was a uterus infection, and it had been going on for this long. And all the symptoms were there. They just didn't catch it despite all these different things. Well, your body memorizes that pain and holds on to it. Like if you suffer trauma, it can get lodged there. And so just like when you suffer psychological damage, like PTSD, your body suffers psychological damage. It gets PTSD in the areas you suffer pain, in short. And this somatic work, or this body works, or the body psychology, whatever you want to call it, or Peter Levine, or the SE, whatever, if you find, and they call it energy healing, but I'm just, it is, I mean, I like body psychology. I just feel like you'll find more people if you look under energy. healing, even though like I've been to Sedona so much that that's what I think when I think energy, and it's just so not that at all. So it's really body psychology, and what you have to do is you have to work out the trauma in those areas. And every time I go, it's such an important part of my recovery. I cannot underline how important a part of my recovery it's been. Every time I've left, movement has gotten better. Every time I've left, movement's gotten better. It always improves the procedures I've had done. And what happens is we're like narrowing down, getting chunks and chunks out of like the uterus, and chunks out of this hip, and chunks out of this, and this and that, and then up my spine. We're going up my spine. And every time I go in, we just let the body just tell us where we need to work on next. And it's every time we get someplace, was there trauma there? Yeah. And I just don't focus on it because I'm in so much overwhelming pain. And that's part of the reason the pain is coming down, is because I'm not just taking medicine. I'm not just getting these injections and these procedures. I'm not just having my knee worked on as well. And I'm not just on the diet. I am also going to this body psychologist and biofeedback, both of them. And I'm getting these like trauma chunks worked out of my body, and it increases the motion. And what's left is like what's real. And that helps me give like such enormous feedback. Every time we get out the trauma part, I'm like, I am going to be able to give so much better feedback to my doctor now on what's going on here, or what's going on here, or because it just narrows down that pain. For example, when I said that SI joints on both sides, I could feel exactly where it was going, exactly where the nerves were going on each side of the SI. I could point to exactly where. I could actually draw you a 3D map of I can feel it now in my back. Of course, I'm unusually sensitive, but I'm saying like, I know that wouldn't happen without this body work that I'm doing, the body psychology, because all these trauma cysts, or whatever you want to call them, like ton of freeze, if you've ever heard that term, just dumps out all the time. And you got to be able to talk and go through it. But if you're in any kind of pain, or if you've had long-term pain, or if you broke your arm when you were younger and that pain comes back like phantom pains, when you hear about things like that, yeah, your body's memorized and hold it. It has like a little chunk of PTSD. You kind of think of it that way. And you hold this PTSD in your body. And just as you have to remap your brain to get the PTSD over with the mental trauma, you have to help your body get over the physical trauma. It's exactly the same way. And there will be times, it will be rare, it's for those of us who have suffered the worst, but there will be times where there will be a giant cyst. I know it sounds weird, but like this energy cyst or something that you want to call it, but I just think of it as a massive ball of a wound or whatever. There's something really, really big, and it'll be blocking it'll be blocking whatever work we're doing. And then to get those gone, the ones that have been gone like for a really long time, it's really interesting where that is in my hips. Like I've really figured out, like, I just know so much more. Like it's really narrowed down, like where the damage is in my spine, if that makes sense. It just, every time it narrows it down, and there are some places that just don't go away. And I'm like, that's what's real now. This is the pain that's from the trauma, and my body's memorizing to stay in protection. It's all tensing in protective mode, like PTSD. We get on edge, and PTSD, remember, PTSD is the cycle of reliving the trauma. That's PTSD. Your brain won't get out of reliving the trauma. And my PTSD person, when I went through that first accident and we rolled 11 times, I had to go to PTSD for that. And I was having trouble getting through it until I finally said, look, what's the goal? How do I know I'm healed? And he said, well, it's when you're like in a movie theater and you see a car accident and you see something roll. Instead of it taking you back to that place and you're reliving the trauma, it doesn't. You're in that place. You're not transported back in time. And I was like, oh, and I never had to go back. After that, that's exactly what I did. I talked myself out of it. If I felt the trauma re-triggered and going into that cycle, I would stop. I'd look away from the screen, or I'd look away from whatever I was in, and I'd start looking at all my surroundings around me and be like, this is where I am now. I'm safe. I'm not about to die. I'm safe. I am in this year. I am in this state. Like right now, I'd be like, okay, it's January. It's 2019. I have an amazing husband. I have 3 kittens. I have an amazing home. I live in here. You know what I mean? Like, and it just pulls your brain right back to where you are, and it pulls it out of that PTSD loop. And that's what I did. Don't know if that'll work for anybody else, but it's the same thing with your body. When my body gets this like pain thing from something that's real, it just triggers and it goes into this thing of like reliving the pain. And this kind of body work gets it out. So I think I've talked enough. I've talked for almost 30 minutes, and I know you guys want more. I love you so much for actually wanting that. But I am wearing myself out, and that is not a good thing when I am trying to do all the things I'm trying to do for you. Gotta get that book written and gotta be prepared to go traveling and all that sort of stuff. Just take it easy, and so I should go. All right. Thank you guys so much. I love you so much, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your January. And I love you. Mwah. Bye. I'll link the first Dr. Phil episode right there, and then maybe Kitty's down there or something like that. We'll find out, shall we? Bye.